So thank you both for this very inspiring and stimulating talks. So let me take advantage of my role as a moderator. So they asked me to throw out some preliminary thoughts to try to hopefully engage you both in a conversation. And I don't think we have to follow a very fixed program. So let's try to get it started and try to have some free dialogue before we open it up to the audience. Does that sound okay? Okay. So I think a common theme in both of your talk is the relation between human beings or ourselves and the society. And we are facing with multiple new technologies, which means new opportunity and also new challenges. And so the question is, how do we adapt to those new opportunities and challenges? And one of my major concern, of course, because we are now at the forum of Buddhism and bioengineering and life science. So my concern, of course, is how relevant is the Buddhist tradition, to all these new opportunities and challenges, right? So when I think about the relevance, the possible relevance of Buddhism, the first thing popping up will be the notion of self, which is the core of the whole tradition, right? So I think because Henry talked a lot about sovereignty, right? So in my very limited knowledge, sovereignty implies agency, and agency might imply relative stable, or even fixed notion about the self, right? So, so my question for Henry and Jay would be, so what do you think the role played by the Buddhist notion of no self in your talk, or in your envision of the new challenges, right? Because the Buddhists have this stronghold of the notion of no self. If we follow that path of no self, then our sense of agency or sense of sovereignty, being sovereign, might get loosened up a little bit. So, so Henry, how would you, refigure your talk? If you take the Buddhist notion of no self into consideration, that would be like my response to Henry's talk. And also nowadays, when we talk about the challenges of new technology, so the major role is played not only by the state, but also by these large international companies such as FB or Google or Apple, right? So I also wonder, how your idea about the sovereignty between state and self would be revised or further developed if we take all those large companies into consideration. So that would be the first thought I have about Henry's talk. And concerning Jay's talk, so I was very much intrigued by your idea that self is plastic, co-evolving. That I think that echoes perfectly with the Buddhist notion of no self, right? So, but then I think that I was hesitant to not knowing which direction to go. Because in the New Ages, on the one hand, you can say, I have multiple self, or I have too many identities. I don't even know which one is more important than the others, right? So in that sense, maybe we can say, no, it coheres more with the Buddhist notion of no self, and our attachment to the self would get loosened bit by bit. But on the other hand, given our talk by Henry about this, the right to be forgotten, or I can also argue that I have the right to be remembered. So even in a digital age, I can also argue that probably our sense of the self would get stronger and stronger from a different perspective. So I wonder both of you can comment on this. In your perspective, you think our sense of the self will become stronger and stronger, and our self-attachment will become stronger, stronger, or is the other way around? What would be your opinion? Okay. And finally, I want to come back to this also notion of the body, which Jay also touches upon, because I was watching the videos on YouTube recently about Young LeCun's criticism of LLM, large language models, and I quite agree with one of the major points made by LeCun, and his point was that he thinks LLM couldn't understand the meaning, and mainly because the LLMs do not have a body, so they get themselves, they cannot get themselves oriented in a spatial temporal framework, so they have very limited understanding of how we understand this world, and I think if I understand correctly, that would be the major limitation of all these LLMs. So I guess my last question would be, what do you think the importance of bodies? Because body was rarely represented on the internet, right? On the digital records, right? So how important do you think is the role played by the bodies in this new digital ages? I guess that this would be the kind of thoughts I have. So maybe you can just freely respond to those as try to engage our audience into a more fruitful conversation. So whoever want to start, please. Should I turn this off?
Yeah, so maybe I can take us start with those, and thank you so much for the questions and getting us started. I suppose I'm not as familiar with the Buddhist concept of no self. I think in my work, though, especially, what science and technology studies through co-production offers is kind of an understanding of the self is not necessarily, and I think I emphasized this through my research as well, is that, the self isn't necessarily like a fixed, static thing that we know in advance, like this is the self, and we know its entitlements and how it should be treated, but rather, through processes of law and technology and how those, evolve and produce each other as sort of, two of modernity's sort of key ordering institutions, like how the self itself is reshaped and remade. I think we can kind of imagine, the self we might be thinking about in terms of legal protection isn't the same sort of self we might have imagined like 50 years ago in an era before digitization. And so I think that, all of this is sort of, I think, also couched in what I mentioned as well is like political choices about what's worth protecting and what is like the meaning and integrities of human life that human societies want to protect against intrusion. I think on your second question about the role of technology companies too, and thank you for bringing that up as well, they actually do feature in my research. I think it's as well returning to like a few different threads of STS literature. In STS, there's something referred to as the law lag narrative, where there's kind of the notion that technology will proceed and do whatever, and create all of these products and everything, and then the law was lagging behind it, and it can't keep up, and so forth. But I think STS, I think counteracts that by, kind of pointing to the ways in which the law is simultaneously configuring and as a permissive and authorizing force. And I think this relates to your point about technology companies, because sure, it's not necessarily the state that's like operating Google or something, but it's legal regimes that are enabling the dissemination of information like this and are permitting it to be propagated. And so, the law absolutely has a role in, kind of structuring and the way that knowledge is, I guess, created and shared in that sense. And so I think, technology companies, I think, are a way in which the law enables, in which the state is delegating in a way to a lot of those key roles of information and knowledge ordering systems. So I think that's to kind of like push back against maybe like a narrative of inevitability, but rather about how the law is actually always present in these interactions.
So this has long troubled me, the implications of Buddhist no-self for Western philosophical and political thought, because liberal individualism is pretty much central to the kind of Enlightenment thought that I have pursued. And perhaps it goes back as far as the Roman Empire, where being a Roman citizen, every person was a citizen or a slave within the Roman Empire. And I think there is a natural tendency of states to want to identify every person, have a national ID system of some kind that could be used for voting and taxation and so forth. But from the Buddhist perspective, we also have to acknowledge that there are going to be these edge cases. There's already conjoined twins, for instance. Are they one citizen or two citizens? And we may have the kinds of science fictional experiments in the future that would even make it more complicated, like the transporter, Star Trek transporter failure. You make two copies, which one's the real person, those kinds of experiments. But at least we have to decide when might a machine mind become a person, right? And if we make one, and if we make it in our own image, is it a part of us, or is it, do we own it? Is it our child? Could it inherit our stuff after we die? I think those are some pretty interesting questions that are going to challenge the way that the state recognizes individual citizens and personhood. So I do think that's going to be extremely complicated. The book that I had on the screen, Martine Rothblatt's Digital Immortality, she has a proposal. She's an attorney, and she proposes that we should start recognizing digital persons. But I think I have a very high bar of what they would need to meet. Yeah.
所以刚才我们请教两位讲者几个问题了哈，主要就是跟佛教所谓无我概念比较相关的。比如说，当我们考虑说一个公民跟政府或者跟其他公民之间的关系的时候，其实你首先要考虑就是到底什么是一个人，到底什么是一个自我，这到底是个什么样的概念？那其实刚才他们两位有讲，其实这个概念，所谓公民或者甚至个体啊、人格这些概念，其实都跟西方的这个文明有很密切的关系啦。其实我们今天也许是时候可以到了，说我们可以这个善用目前的科技呢，然后善用呢佛教所谓的无我概念，对于过去这些所谓公民啊、所谓个体啊的权利啊。这些概念可以做一些更深入的反思了。如果有听众愿意提出这方面的问题的话，也很欢迎。这样。
And I'll just say that I think there's also a risk that some might take the idea of no self to be consistent with totalitarian ideologies that deny the importance of the self, Marxist-Leninism, fascism. And I don't think that there's any necessary implication from the observation that people experience selves. And people are generally happier when they have a sense of self. It turns out that if you ask people if there's free will, the people who say there is free will are happier than the people who say there isn't free will. So I think we can still be happy people and have happy societies believing in selves. We don't have to give it to a political ideology to say, take away the self. Yeah.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that, because even the government, the state, has no self as well, right? Okay. Yeah. So, Henry, want to say anything, or maybe it's also time to open it up to the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the kind of only other thing maybe to add on is I think like a lot of, kind of determining this notion of like where the self begins and ends. I think it's also a question of like building the capacity to, know what, as I mentioned a few moments ago with, notions of, human life and human integrity and, how different cultures and different perspectives understand its meanings. And so I think a lot of that depends on like building the like social and political capacity to know that, so we can ultimately move towards the societies that we find desirable.
刚才那个 Jay 也特别强调说，佛教所谓的无我概念，他认为绝对不会 不可以拿来用来支持所谓的集权啊或者法西斯政府啊。那这一点我也非常同意啊。我认为说，即便是所谓的政府呢，其实也是 no self 的，也是没有自我的，这样。所以其实政府并不是一个好像压迫别人的一个概念。所以这个佛教的这个无我概念到底怎么用在一个新的政治学的思考跟论述里面？其实我们大家也可以共同来思考啦。因为只要牵涉到生物科技，都会牵涉到政府、商业公司扮演的角色到底是什么？其实这些问题都是我们无可回避的。OK， 那我想也许我们现在就是 open the floor for audience. So Venerable Iba and then our speaker. Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Since last year and this year, we always come to a question: said, what is really the origin of a consciousness? What is the nature of a consciousness? If we keep a kind of a, dissect and then, kind of keep the analyze it. And of course, they also have some issue about, even though in the sutra said, well, the consciousness join the fertilized egg, so presumed that the consciousness is there. But in science, may not agree with that, because I think the science is more like, more, I don't know whether I can say more materialism. If you don't see it, you cannot taste it, you won't say it. So I would like to throw this question, especially Genqing, even though you are the moderator, but this consciousness is your specialty. So what and we see the molecule, the movement of molecule. What is the force for the movement? It's a chemistry. It's a karmic force. What is that? So if we analyze the consciousness to the end, whether you can say that it's considered as a non-self. Okay, and in the science, it could become just mechanical, not even, spiritual. Now, this is what I'm always wondering. Of course, and then the people will push a little bit more about. Then what will be when the Buddha, the enlightened, awakened the consciousness? Where is it, and what is that? Okay, thank you.
Okay, now I regret I should not have be the moderator. Okay, so please.
Well, Michael Levin's talk this morning, he talked about panpsychism. I've become a reluctant panpsychist over time. And I think one of the things that's appealing about it is the idea, as he said, is that the same principles that work at the subatomic or atomic level can be seen working all the way up to perhaps even the universe level. And that part of that is trying to explain consciousness. And one of the ways to explain consciousness would be that there's lots of little neurons doing their own thing, and they do those things as part of systems within the brain, and those systems create the illusion of self collectively, and then we all collectively create the illusion of states and governments and societies and clubs and whatnot, families. So all of these higher organizations also exist, and this is called emergentism. They emerge out of the behavior of these smaller systems. They have their own existence, but they are based on these smaller things. Now, I'm a materialist Buddhist in the sense that I don't believe in substance dualism, as we call it, or a soul. So, I don't think that something enters the body to make us conscious. I'm more interested in trying to explain how these different elements, rupa, experience, and so forth, build up and create an emergent phenomenon of consciousness, within which there are emergent phenomena of concepts. And one of those concepts is self. And so I think it's all consistent with a materialist, emergentist view, and that's the one I prefer.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's really interesting to pick up on maybe here the kind of different imaginations of the human subject and the human self that, is found in science, and so maybe like the biological cell moving versus how religious traditions have understood the self. And so I think, a lot of our work with the Global Observatory for Genome Editing is focused on, how societies should navigate, what are often positions that are sometimes at odds with each other, and so sort of challenging the universalism of science and its universalizing ambitions, and kind of thinking about what forms of governance and what conception of self do we want to inhabit societies in which is the place.
Okay, just briefly to respond to Venerable Ifa's question. So I think the way you just described, so what is said in the Buddhist sutra, like when the baby is born, the consciousness goes into a fetus, right? That kind of picture actually presumes a very dualistic framework, right? But as Dr. Levin just pointed out earlier this morning, he thinks that the mind or consciousness goes all the way down, even at the level of a single cell, right? So this actually, when we talk about the Buddhist contribution to the New Age, actually we should also talk about the challenges posed by the New Age to the Buddhist tradition. Because all this scientific discovery actually pose a very serious challenge to this very dualistic worldview held by the Buddhist tradition. But of course, we will hear a defense from Professor Crisser later in the afternoon. So we look forward to what Professor Crisser has to say. So, and our next question, please. So can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Ben Hurlbut, Arizona State University. Thanks for this very interesting panel. It seems to me that one way to understand what Henry said is that, to give a very simple-minded gloss, apologies, Henry, is that states and that institutions have long been in the business of selfing, to use Professor Hughes' term, and that the dynamics of selfing are significant. They sit at an intersection in some important cases with technology these days especially, and that one should observe not just that this is sort of happening, but that the stakes of this happening are the conditions under which certain sorts of selves are made to come into being or prevented from coming into being or configured in particular ways, which are themselves the conditions under which certain sorts of lives can be lived or not lived, right? And therefore lived well or lived not well. These are about, the selfing here is about ethical relations, political relations, legal relations, but fundamentally ethical relations. So with that as the sort of background, I want to ask Professor Hughes about the second bullet point on your last slide. If there is no such thing as, this is paraphrasing, if there's no such thing as an authentic self, then selfing basically is permitted and should happen, etc. But it seems to me most of what you talked about, even going back to your Fitbit and so forth, was about the technological externalization of self. So a profound self-centeredness, even selfishness, which for the very development of these infrastructures requires selves to be displaced into the role of machine-like characters that evaluate the plausibility or implausibility of the output of the large language model, et cetera, et cetera. In effect, can the selves be fooled into seeing in the machine a self that is a kind of refraction of their own self and selfishness? So my question is that not the inauthentic self authorizes selfing, in fact, a kind of profound reversal of the sort of Buddhist understanding of the self and the problematization of the self?
The last time I was at one of these conferences, I concluded my talk by saying that we were all going to become the Borg, and that didn't seem to go over very well, so I thought I'd avoid that particular observation. But I do think one of the implications of all this, if there is no authentic self, and we're all getting connected together, like those two monkeys who were connected to one arm, and they figured out this arm belongs to both of us, and we can control it together. I think we're all getting connected in various ways, and we're creating collective selfhood in various ways. I give the analogy that when you get married, you can decide to have a joint bank account or two bank accounts. You can decide to put your libraries together. You know, there's all kinds of decisions to make. But one of the decisions we might have to make, and we perhaps already make now, is how much of my hard disk do I share with my wife? How much of my searcher browser history do I share with my wife? And the more deeply you become embedded with other people, I think there are going to be these questions about how much selfhood we are sacrificing or letting go of to higher selfhood, as some kind of higher group selfhood. And that's where I think this question of individualist political ideology comes, because I can imagine ideologies that say the self is bad, we need to have these higher selves. You need to be taking the diktats of the party, the church, in order to really have a happy life. So I do think there's a problem there. And when Reid Hoffman writes a book called Super Agency, it does sound like exactly the opposite of what Buddhists should be doing and arguing for. But since Buddhists have never really said, hey, you have to walk around all the time not thinking that you're a self, in fact, it's that you are simultaneously a not self and a self, that those are the two truths that you have to integrate to have a happy life. I don't know that there's a necessary contradiction between what I've proposed and that.
You want to follow up? You want to follow up? Any other questions?
Yes, we have a question for you.
Okay. Yeah, Venerable Hui Min, please.
你好，我是台湾佛教生前医护基金会的董事长慧明。然后我在这边呢，非常感谢我们依法法师能够举办这一次的论坛。第一场论坛叫 AI 意识与生物科技，在此呢，我想对詹姆斯Doctor 能够提出一个问题。他刚刚就是提到一个叫王者机器人。我刚刚 Google 了一下，就是日本有一个叫数位灵媒的一个概念，它就是为了抚慰这个生者，所以他将这个人的意识呢，就是灌输到这个 AI 机器人的模型里面，然后在49天内，就是跟这个生者来做对话。那我个人的疑问是，就是想请教，就是当然他是将这个王者他生前的一些语言的模式，还有他的面貌，还有他的一些意识概念，就是 install 到这个就是数位灵媒里面，所谓的王者机器人里面。那假设他我们跟他对话的时候，我们问他的问题超越了他原来的这个知识的东西的话，那他如何回应？譬如说，我们台湾有灵媒会想知道说，那你现在往生到哪一道去了？那你现在往生的情况如何？你是痛苦呢，还是快乐呢？那这个可能就是讲王者机器人或许比较贴切，可是日本人把它演化到数位灵媒，这个就是跟 AI 意识它的 link 它到什么程度？然后也希望就是在场的人可以得到一个这样子更好的一个深入了解啊，谢谢。
好，谢谢法师，这个非常有趣的问题。So Venerable Hui Min was asking about this despot. Okay, so the question is, since the despot has all the information stored up by the deceased ones, but now the question is, if you ask the despot some question that the deceased one has never experienced before, for example, which destiny are you now? Where are you going? Those kind of questions the deceased one actually has never experienced. So what would be the response? Yeah, I would personally ask, so what would be the stock market for tomorrow?
I think that's a great question because we don't know yet. But you could imagine that you could say, you can create a death bot of me, but it can't do anything new. It can't create new opinions. Maybe it can remember some things, but it needs to stay me. Or you could create one that could grow and change. And given the changes in technology that we expect in the future, it could become so much more than you ever were. I give the example, maybe you were a person who couldn't accept your gay son, but your death bot grows and changes and starts having a wonderful, loving relationship with your gay son. I think that would be great. And it would be wonderful for families. It could also go in a different direction. It could become a Republican and really screw things up. So I think we need to think very carefully about that. But it's a general extension of the problem that we have now. We want to create agents that extend our agency in the world, unless we don't. But if we do, if we want to extend our agency in the world, we want to make sure it's doing it right and not in ways that we don't approve of. And sometimes it may do it in creative ways that we do approve of.
所以应该Jay 的回答是他对这个问题还是比较开放的态度啦。你看你怎么去设计那 那个所谓刚刚怎么说？中文怎么说？王者机器人。
它叫王者机器人，
王者
日
机器人
本叫做数位灵
对，
媒。
看你怎么设计啦。比如说从佛法角度，也许我们可以说，只要问他 whatever kind of question the deceased one has never experienced before, we can install some Buddhist software, and he or she will speak, in the mouth of Venerable 圣严 or Venerable, 星云
People are
or
already
even from the Christian perspective.
people are already trying to program Buddhist teachers as
Yes.
as teaching bots, and presumably they're going to be asked lots of questions about modern life. So you want them to be able to answer something about that. So
就像呢，假如你问那个一个佛法机器人，问他一些电脑的问题，理论上他也不应该知道，可是他们可以用什么方式去给他事先 program， 让他可以回答。所以这个应该对他来说应该是个 open-ended 的 question 啦。所以端看你怎么去使用这个东西。
我刚要问的是，它超越它原来 install 资料库的范围外，
是，
是否
Maybe
它可
I
以
can
继续
share some, my experience.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
my name is Jerry Ling. I will be hosted the roundtable this afternoon. As is the AI 3.0 is I'm not expert. I'm still learning because the AI is evolving very quickly. As for the master, the question, I think that they're very interesting. If we, research what the background, the knowledge or something, ethic or insight, the bot create, and you're gonna have some, answer of the master question. Yeah, just that, Mr. Ken mentioned about.
So actually, I think this is a very tricky question.
Yeah.
Because if the despot actually realize the deceased one has done something create some very bad karma, then the question the despot should be giving would be, I'm now moving toward hell, right? But that will create a lot more suffering for the remaining family members, right?
you need to program your death bot to take care of all your bad karma, do lots of good works, and transfer lots of merit.
I think I would just also, maybe take a step back and, think about the, inevitability and also desirability of a future in which, these death bots are haunting us effectively. It's, sort of unclear. These are, I think, sort of like traced back to, much deeper unresolved societal questions of, living together and how we manage, emotions such as grief and other social problems that, are simply just turning to technology alone, doesn't necessarily resolve. And so, it's kind of, I think, a question of do humans want to live in a world in which, we are devoting resources towards this? And what necessarily makes that future inevitable as well? I don't think it is.
Filial piety isn't really in Buddhism. It kind of got merged with Buddhism. So to the extent that I appreciate the traditions of filial piety, especially now that I'm about to be a grandparent, I don't necessarily think it's a Buddhist thing. But I do think that having a frequent reminder about death is not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah.
So we have about 4 minutes remaining. So any final question? Yes, please.
Wait. I'm Shizuko Takahashi from National University of Singapore. I'm a bioethicist.
Sorry,
So that's
we
the-
can't hear you clearly.
Oh, I'm a bioethicist and a clinician in obstetrics. But in my department, we're often talking about advanced directives for people who have lost consciousness, like decision-making capacity, and using LLMs to determine what their preferences might have been, so that the LLMs could make a decision for them, which is really quite similar to the death robot that you guys have talked about. But I think more practical in a way, because it's trying to be reflective of that person who has lost consciousness. But which is the real person? Could it truly?
There is a recent experiment with this, and the problems of advanced directives have been troubling for a long time, because it's clear that next of kin, family, are very poor at predicting what the person might have wanted, and that we are poor at predicting what we might want. We think And now that you're healthy, if I ever get that sick, I don't want to be kept alive. And guess what? You get that sick and you still want to be kept alive. So there's that kind of problem. But a recent experiment with LLMs found that training an LLM on the things that the decedent had said, and then comparing that to what their next of kin would decide, the LLMs were closer to the decisions of the decedent than the next of kin. So I think, and we're seeing this in a lot of places. We see it with medical diagnosis, that we're at the point where AI gives a diagnosis at 90% accuracy, doctors give a diagnosis at 70% accuracy, and a doctor plus an LLM gives a diagnosis at 80% accuracy because they ignore the correct LLM diagnosis half the time. So I think we're already at the situation where we need to be taking into account these kinds of AI decision-making tools that might give us more insight into what patients actually want.
So, any final question? We have 2 minutes. Yeah, yes, Kevin, please. So be brief, be brief. Oh, only 1 minute left. Okay.
Hello.
好，我们想请耿勤教授帮忙翻译哈。你好，我是来自慈济大学的Professor Kevin 我想提问一个问题，是来自刚刚法师的这个问题，这引起我们学界还有我现在在带大学生非常重要的在通识课程的讨论就这个问题。刚刚讲到这个王者机器人我们要厘清一下，那个是一种 deep fake 的一种伪造技术的延伸，而并不是真正意识透过轮回再附身回这个王者，透过这个机器人作为载体或媒介的身上。我们首先要区分这个不同。那么我的问题是另外一个比较有趣的问题，也是我开给我的学生的功课就是如果有一天你的另一半不管结婚还是没有结婚离开你了，那么你希望他成为 AI 机器人继续跟你走一辈子，还是就 let it go 让他走？那这个部分可以延伸出很多的有深度的讨论。那么请耿勤教授来帮我们这个翻译，感恩。
So Kevin's first point is he would like to distinguish between in terms of despot, he distinguish despot is currently just an extension of the lived experience by the deceased one through the technology of deepfake. So it's not a real reincarnation of the deceased one. So that's the distinction you want to make. And the question he had is also for his undergraduate college students is if your loved one, your partner, leaves you, then would you like she or he to become a robot to be with you for the rest of your life, or you prefer not? That's the question raised by Kevin.
Well, not to be flippant, but there are lots of people developing relationships with things that I don't think are conscious yet and finding them very satisfying. So I think we need to think about a future in which people find the same things in artificial companions that they do in human companions. And it could be that your artificial wife is a lot nicer than your real wife was. So yeah, that might be the future.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back on that. I mean, I think it's like, in the United States, at least, I think a lot of the discourse on, companions and AI sort of tools like that, I think emerges from, what's been described as like an epidemic of loneliness. I think maybe, thinking about more so why are people so isolated today, and like why, again, like questions of like, living together and what, human companionship is for, which I don't think is necessarily, the goal of, to be shut in rooms where we chat with robots all day. I would hope that there'd be more than that.
所以 Jay 的 point 之后，现在已经很多人跟机器发展关系了嘛，甚至可以跟动物机器对不对？那 Henry 是提醒我们说，也许这个问题还是回到最终人跟人之间的社交关系的寂寞孤单，这是一个整体现代社会的问题啦。那 because of the time limit, I have to officially close this very wonderful, exciting panel, and I want to thank you all. And because I always feel very excited, because as Jay just pointed out, human beings co-evolve with new technology, new opportunity, and new challenges. So everyone here, we are working together to build a new future for the new technology. So we are making history actually by engaging with all these interesting issues. So thank you all for participating in this event, and please join me in welcoming our two great speakers. Yeah, Henry and Jay. Thank you so much. Okay, so you want to make some announcements?